And this is what we had done yesterday. Quick recap, we had taken, this is the code for the update. We had taken a data adapter.update method, and this method required 3 commands, out of which I had created one of them for you. So da.update required you to do a da.update command, da.insert command, and da.delete command. So I had expected you all to finish this, but you'll have not. So I'll complete this for you. Those who have done it can help me with this code. First thing is, this is the insert command. So a lot of similarities with the update. Right, so this is the insert command. Can you tell me what is the changes that you require here in the parameters that we are creating? What are the only changes that you require?
The MP number original to current.
All the values for this will be current. Okay, and the order actually doesn't matter how you add the parameters. It can be up and down, but I like to just go in the same order. So that was the insert method. I would have asked you to do this with the stored procedure. I've done it with command text, but you have to do it with the stored procedure. And then the other thing, of course, was the delete command. So let's quickly look at delete as well. Same thing to be done, but this time in delete. Right. And delete only has one parameter, right? It doesn't have all these parameters, so nothing to be done there in the delete. That was my command. Okay, so I've done this from the previous code that you have tried out. So if you've done the previous code, then this should not be a problem. And then, of course, the 3 commands all given together. So it took me less than 5 minutes actually to get the other 2 if you had got the update working. It's just a matter of copy paste. Hopefully, I have not messed up on anything while doing the copy paste. All right. And let's try running all 3 things together now. Yesterday, I ran it only with update. Let's try running all 3 things together. So fill. So I'm updating a couple of values. Let's say this changes. This I've changed Pratik's name back to Pratik. 2 updates happening here. I'm deleting one record. So my friend Savio has gone from the database, added a different record. Okay. So 2 updates, one delete and one insert. Right, and I do an update. Now this is updating all the changes back to the database. And if I run this, do a fill, and you'll find that these are the changes that we have got back. So 2 updates happening, 1 delete, and then the new record that has been added. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now I haven't done that, but you could very easily do this in a transaction if you want to. What does the transaction indicate?
One complete result, sir.
Either all should work or none should work. You could if you want to. All right, that could be one way of doing it. Right now, what will happen? Supposing there are 10 updates to be made, 10 changes to be made. Let's say 5 of them work, 5 of them don't work. Then the 5 that have worked will go to the database. And the 5 that have not worked, I mean the sixth one, let's say, gave an error. So from that point of, it will stop. So if you want, you could do it in a transaction where all should work or none should work. That is one option. There's another option out here called da.continue update on error equal to true, for example. And what this would do is, I'm not setting it, but in case you do set it, what this would do is, supposing now there are 10 records to be changed or changes made to the database. 5 of them work, the 6th of them gave an error. Now, if the 6th one gives an error, it will ignore that 6th error and move on to the 7th, and then 8th, and then 9th, and then 10th. So if it gives an error, it ignores it, moves to the next one. That's your continue update on error equal to true. What error am I talking about? The database error. If while updating it gives an error. So 3 strategies that I have given you here. One is what? The default strategy does what? If I don't do anything.
It updates whatever is correct and skips the remaining.
Right. So whatever, no, the first one is moment you get an error, it stops updating. That is the first one. Second one, I suggested you could have a transaction for all or nothing commit. That's the second option. And the third one is if you say a continue update on error equal to true, that would do what? That will, if an error occurred on a particular record, it will ignore that error and move on to the next one. So whatever records were not giving errors will work. Whatever errors were giving errors will not work. So different ways of doing this. And then you can actually expand on this further. You can then find out the rows that have not worked, show them to the user, and then do all of those things. But that is beyond the scope of what I'm going to do out here. I'm giving you just the basics to get started. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, unrelated. I'm not adding it in this example, but I want to talk about this in any case. I want to tell it to you about in any case, but I'm not saying that it would be used in this example necessarily. You have a ds.get changes, and what ds.get changes returns is again a data set. Okay. Now, what is ds.get changes returning is a data set with all the changes, only the changed records. Now, what is the advantage of doing something like this? While passing it to da.update, instead of passing the entire data set, now this will also include the unchanged rows. So supposing there are 1,000 records and only 2 have to be updated. Can you go mute, please? Somebody's mic is on. Supposing you are trying to do an update on a data set which has 1,000 records. Now it will go through all 1,000 records because it is going to loop through everything. And what if it had only 2 records that had changes? So it's going to go through the other 998 records which are unchanged because it loops through everything by default. So how could I optimize that a little bit? By calling a ds.get changes, which will return only the records that have changes in them. And then instead of passing ds out here, you pass what? ds2. So that is another way of optimizing this further. Now, after you finish making the changes, now the row states in your data set have been modified or added or deleted or whatever. But now you have updated the changes back to the database. So what you can do is after this, you can call it ds.accept changes. And what accept changes does is it converts all your row states to unchanged. Right? what will happen? What are the changes that you're making? Your row states are either unchanged or modified
Modified, delete.
or added or deleted. So modified and added will now become unchanged. Why will they become unchanged? Why are we saying make them unchanged? Because
We have accepted the changes.
we have saved these values into the database. So now the values in the database and your changes are the same. So which is why I'm calling this. Now, what about the deleted rows? Any guesses what will do to the deleted rows when you call accept changes?
It will delete them permanently from the database.
Very good. Very good. It will delete them permanently from your data set because now they've been deleted from the data set also. So this is what accept changes does for you. Right? I'm not writing this code. I'm not writing in code format. I'm just writing it in you knowing the method format. Okay? Because there'll be a lot of ifs and thens, and I don't want to get into that aspect. The third thing that you need to know about here is ds.reject changes. So reject changes, what it does is it's like an undo button. I'll show you what I mean by this. If I did ds.reject changes, right? So what this would do here is see for yourself, fill. So I made some changes here. Now if I said reject changes, you tell me what it's doing.
Undo.
Undoing the operation.
Basically, it is taking you back to the unchanged values. When you filled it, what are the original values there? It's taking you back to the original values. So whatever current values are there, it's going back to original. And all the row states now again become what? Unchanged. But now all the changes that you made are gone, are lost. And you go back to this. So these are methods that you need to know about. So both accept changes and reject changes make the row states as unchanged, but accept changes says that the current values become the original values. In reject changes, all the values are lost and the original values now come back to you out there. Are we clear on this, everybody? So this is how you can do a reject changes. This is like an undo. So these are three methods that we have there, and you can actually call out here. Any questions before we take it forward? Okay, now I have a button here which says filter department number, and I'm also keeping a text box next to it. So the way in which I want to use this is I want the user to enter a department number and click on the button. And when he clicks on the button filter department number, I want to only show the employees for that department. So let's say, for example, I said filter for department number 10. And if I click on the button, I should now only see these records. And to do that, I don't know whether the image is open. No. So to do that, what object would you need to use out here is the data view. So the data view, if you remember yesterday, allows you to create a view based on a data table. And this view based on the data table is allowing you to do two things, either filtering or sorting of records. because you can't do it directly to the data table itself. So this is why you would use a data view. So that's what I'm going to try and do in here. Okay. All right. So let me start off by creating a data view. Now the data view is based on a data table. So DV of the data table. Data table here is ds.tables of EMPS. It's saying it's based on this data table. The data view has two properties. One is sort equal to, and if I said sort equal to name, what do you think this would do? What do you think this would do?
It will return the name column in sorted order.
It will show you all the records in sorted order of name. Oh, this is whatever you give in the order by clause. So if you said select star from table name order by, whatever you give in the order by can be given here in db.sort. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes.
All right. And the second property that we'll be using is dv.rowFilter. Right? And this is what you give in the where clause. Whatever you want to give in the where clause can be given in rowFilter equal to so and so. So what I want to do is I want to say where department number equal to, and then I want to take the department number that's there in the text box. So I'm saying plus text box 1. That was the name of my text box that I created out there. .text. So what is text box 1? This text box here. So when I click here, it's going to show me what? All the rows whose department number is the value in the text box entered. Okay. Now if I just run this code as is, right? So fill, and let's say I said 30. Now it creates the data view, but it does not show you the data view in the grid. So the data view is created, but I want to show that data view in the grid. So this line of code, what have we done out here?
Data grid view.
Right? Grid view dot, let's say is equal to ds.tables of m's. Instead of this, what would I do now? Is equal to the data view that I created here. And if I now show you this, the additional thing that's happening here is filter shows you this, or whatever filter that you want. Right? If you want all the records again, what? Do a fill, which gives you all the records again. Questions, if any, about data view? Two things that you can do here are what? First is sorting, and secondly, filtering. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
Now, I don't need to do all of this. I don't need to do all of this because every data table, ds.tables of m's, for example, every data table has a property called as default view. So what is this default view property? The default view is of type data view. Now, this is like a inbuilt data view that's available on every table. And when you're reading this, when you're doing this, this actually is doing ds.tables of employees dot default view. This is actually doing this. So line number 56. When we write line 56, it is actually doing line 57.
57.
So you're not looking at the table, but you're actually looking at that default view that is available with every table. Right? We don't need to write default view. It is understood that it's picking up from the default view. Are we understanding these two concepts? That every data table has a default view associated with it, which is of type data view. So instead of creating a new data view, I can just simply say what? Default view dot row filter equal to department number equal to so and so. So I'm not creating an additional data view. I'm changing the default view of that data table. And now I don't need to write this line because the grid is anyway picking it up from the default view. So the same code now, but this time without having to do all the extra things, right? So fill and then whatever department number that you wanted. So filter. Are we clear on this? Questions, if any, on how to use the default view?
Right. It's clear.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
It's clear. It's clear.
I'm sorry, I could not hear you very clearly.
I'm saying the concept is clear, sir.
Yeah. Okay. I thought you were asking a doubt. All right. Now, tell me what would happen if I did this. If I made some changes, right? If I made some changes here. And when I tried to do an update, at that time, I'm not clicking on update. But when I tried to do an update, the values had to go back to the database. At the time of trying out an update, what if the connection was not available? What if the, let's say it's on a different machine and the network was down, connection not available at that time, server is down for maintenance. So what would happen then? Would I be able to do an update now if the connection is not available for whatever reason?
No, sir.
No, sir.
And let's say you don't expect it to be up for a while. Now, what would happen if you stop running your program? Will the changes be there or will they be lost now?
No, sir. They will lose.
You lose the changes because the data set is making the changes in the data set object. And the moment you end your program, the data set is lost. So if I wanted to save these changes somewhere, what I want to do here is I want to do two things. First is I want to save the changes out here. Okay. And the second thing, I'm not writing the code in there, but second thing is when I come back later, I want to read the value from there and get the changes back again. So what am I doing out here? What is this like? What does this sound like?
Commit.
No.
Save point.
Save point.
Sorry. No, I'll put it this way. The data set is an object of the dataset class. DS is an object of the dataset class. So have you tried doing this before? Ki whatever is there in your current object, you save it somewhere.
Serialization.
And then you come back and read the values back again. So this is nothing else but serialization. So we did it with a class 1 object, but instead of a class 1 object, what if I want to serialize a data set? Okay. Now serialization, you use different formatters. So which of these formatters? We use 4 formatters. Do you remember what the 4 are for serialization?
Binary formatter, SOAP formatter, XML formatter, and
JSON.
And JSON. These are the 4 formatters that you use. Now, which of these 4 formatters would be ideal for a data set?
XML.
Why XML?
Because we are passing and retrieving data as an XML object from database.
Because the data set itself is in XML format. What are the 3 keywords while describing the data set? We said it is a disconnected, updatable, XML set of records. So the data set also is storing values as XML. And then that would be the most obvious choice. Now, instead of us writing code to serialize it into XML using the XML serializer, the dataset already has methods available which support serialization, inbuilt methods. You don't need to do all of that. We are going to simplify it even further. And what I will do here is I will firstly write this to a file, right? And I'll save this to a file, and then when I'll come back later, I will read this from a file. So this is what we're going to do out here. And advantage being that even if the connection is not available at this point, later you can recreate the data set and update it whenever required. So let's see how we can do this. Let's start off with write to file. So XML, the data set here has a method called write two things, write XML schema and write XML. Now write XML schema will store the structure of your data set, including the constraints that you might have created in code. So we have created some constraints here, remember?
Yes.
So these constraints also will be saved. The schema will save all of this. So that's what I'm doing first. Write XML schema. Let's say ems.xsd. And the second thing that I'll do here is ds.write XML. And this would go into an XML file. Now, while writing this, I also want to store everything that have changed in here. So what are the changes that I made? I have changed the row state. I've got the current values. I've got the original values. So everything needs to be saved out here. And if you want to save all those changes, there's a overload available here called XML write mode.diffgram. So diffgram will save it with whatever changes that you made, including your row states, current values, and original values. Are we clear on what we are doing out here? We're just saving these changes into a XML file, including all changes made. The read from file would do the exact opposite. So give me the code for read from file. Exact opposite. Yes, please. Look at the earlier code and give me the exact opposite. ds dot read XML schema, whatever, ems dot xsd. And the second thing here is ds dot read XML. ems dot XML. This time XML read mode dot diffgram. Okay. Now, after doing this, I also need to do what I did out here to show the values back into the grid. So this line is saving, showing it into the grid. So let's start with fill. I'll make a few changes here. Okay. So Abhishek has again become Abhi, right? Pratik continues to get a raise, right? I'll delete my other friend Peter, and I'm going to insert a new record out here. Right, this is what I have done. So two changes that I made out of the first two records for Abhi and Pratik. Pratik's salary, I think I dropped off a 0 today. I don't know that. Anyway, Pratik's salary increased and Peter went away from my database, and then of course inserted a new one. So I'll write this to a file. The file has been created at this point. If I come back here later, if I read from file, what do I get here now? I get all those changes that I made. But if I did a fill from database, what am I getting? These are the values that are there in the database, right? If I read from file, these are the values that were there I had stored in the file. Okay. So the values are still in the file. Let me show you the file. This will be in the bin debug thing. And firstly, your ems.xsd file, which contains all the constraints, right? The structure of ems, structure of departments, constraints that we have added, right? Constraints that we added out here. And the second thing that you have here is ems.xml. So now looking in this data, tell me whether you can figure out what has happened. First two records, how do you know that they have changes in them? How does it know that it has changes in them?
Has changes is modified here.
Changes.
Correct. So the row state for modified is shown out here. And these are all the current values. These are the current values, right? So original value was Abhishek, and then current value of course is Abhi. And Pratik had a very low salary, but then we increased the basic. Now look at this, the order 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and from 4 it has jumped to 6. So what about order 5? Order number 5, row order 5.
So deleted that row.
We have deleted that. So that deleted row will appear later. I'll show you where the deleted row appears. And this one, you can make out from this that this is the inserted row. This is the newly added row. And if you scroll down lower, that deleted row appears here. And what are these now? What are these? What do these contain?
Attribute
Original value.
values.
The original values. Original values. The ones on top are the current values. Right, so this is how it's actually saving it. So now it knows how to recreate it. It knows what changes you've made. So what can I now do? When I run the code the next time, I can read it from file and now simply go and update to my database. So I stop running this and I come back here. You'll find the database now has the updated values that I have put in there from the file. Are we clear on this, everybody? So that's how you can
Every time we write
persist.
in the
Sorry?
file. So every time we write in the file, it will be overriding the old value.
Override. It's like create mode, file mode dot create. It'll override that. It will take the current values in data set and put them into the file. What are the current means? The values that are there in the data set when you click on save to file. All right.
Yes, sir.
So what we tried to do here was persist that object and then work with it. Any queries, any questions about this? All right. So I'm going to go away from data sets. That's all that I have for data sets. I mean, data sets is a huge topic, but that's all that I'm covering here from a course perspective. What you need to cover out here, right? And we're going to turn our attention to ASP.NET MVC and all the concepts we have studied over the last 10 days and now 10, 12, whatever number of days are all going to be put into play out here. Okay. So let's start first with, before we get into MVC, I want to just show you one more concept. I'm sure you already know about that, but this happens a lot in MVC. So I'm going to actually talk about it a little bit. So I'm going to talk about something called as inversion of control and dependency injection. I'm sure you have heard about this before in Java, right? So what is inversion of control? It's a concept by which rather than the programmer creating the objects that he wants, somebody else creates this for him. Okay, I'll give you an example. Let's say if I had a class 1 out here, right? And let's say the class required an object of type employee in it. So one way of doing this would be to do this employee obj is equal to new employee. And this new employee would instantiate an employee object, and then I can do whatever I want with the employee object in that later in the code. So maybe I have a display method out here or something where I could call now obj.display if it had a display method. Right? So this is one way of doing it. Now, sometimes what happens is either the object that you're creating, you may not be able to create that object for various reasons, first possibility, or the creation of that object might be very, very complex. So what it's doing to create the object might be a very complex operation. Now, to simplify things for you, you can use this concept of inversion of control, wherein the object that you need, instead of you getting into the complexities of creating the object, this object is passed to you, is given to you. I will not create the object. I will not say new so-and-so. Instead, this object would be injected into my code, right? Using one of the different techniques. And dependency injection is one concept which allows you to implement inversion of control. So inversion of control is the principle, is the design principle. And the dependency injection is the actual physical implementation of the concept of inversion of control. So one way of doing this could be through the constructor, for example. So let's say I had now ignore the the code out here. It needs to have a public and all of that. I'm not focusing on the code, but I could write a constructor which takes what? Takes an employee, whatever, EMP as a parameter. And I could write now code which says obj is equal to EMP. So my object that I have got here, instead of creating a new object, I'm receiving this object through the constructor. Now, who's passing this to me? Who's passing this to me? Some other software which is doing the dirty work for you. Dirty work as in, maybe it's very difficult task to be done. So now you're not worried about how the object has come to you. You're not worried. You know that I want the object. I'll just put an object in the constructor and I get the value of it. And it is the responsibility of someone else now to pass it on to you. So this feature is going to be used a lot in our code in ASP.NET MVC core. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, sir.
Any questions about this? Okay, so I have a simple example. It's not a very complex one. It's just trying to show you how dependency injection works. So I need same object same thing that I showed you in the notepad file. I have an employee object that I want to create. There's a class here called employee. So I have a employee object that I want to create in this class called employee client. Now to receive this employee object using dependency injection, different constructs or different ways of doing this. One is using something called as constructor injection, in which the object that you require is being passed through the constructor. Now the object you receive here, what am I simply doing? My class level object EMP is equal to the local EMP object that I have. Second possibility is instead of receiving to the constructor, you can receive it through a method. Same thing, receiving it through a method, similar code to what we wrote in the constructor. Third possibility, receive that object in a property. So employee equal to value. Value, of course, would be the value of type employee. This is property injection. Object is passed through a property. And someone else, calling this the injector class, is doing the injection for you. So what is this class doing now? Creating an object of type employee and passing it through constructor injection. Or in the second example, creating an object of type employee and passing it through property injection, obj.employee equal to employee. Third possibility, create an object, pass it through method injection, obj.setIn. Are we clear on this? Questions, if any? All right. So now, finally, we can get into ASP.NET MVC. If you want to create web applications in websites in here, in .NET framework, you had an option of something called as, you can create a web application or web form. It was called as web forms. Or you could use the ASP.NET MVC approach to create this. Now, both of them are diametrically opposite. The way in which you write code is entirely different in web forms and in ASP.NET MVC. So web forms, for example, uses the WinForms type approach where you're writing code in events and working with that and whatnot. Okay, whereas the ASP.NET MVC is an entirely different programming paradigm. So this, for example, would use events, and this does not. I mean, that is one major difference between the two, right? When you move to .NET Core, okay, or .NET, now of course version 5 onwards is called as .NET. You do not have support for web forms. You have only support for ASP.NET MVC. But here it's called ASP.NET MVC Core to distinguish it from ASP.NET MVC in .NET Framework. Okay. Both of these, this and this, have some similarities, but a lot of differences as well. So I would say about 80% of the code is the same, right? Between this and this. What is totally different is the configuration and is the approach used out there. So that is totally different, but other code is somewhat same. Now, why I'm warning you about this is because when you search for help, suppose you're searching for help for a particular topic, you will get both the codes. You'll get this also and you'll get this also. So make sure to search for help on this ASP.NET MVC core, because the way in which things happen in this may not be the same in this. Okay. Also, to make it more confusing, when they use it in .NET, they don't use the core suffix. With .NET, what do they call it? They just call it ASP.NET MVC. So this becomes a little very, problematic for you and in the learning phase. If you try to read up on some resources, be sure what you're reading for. Look out for ASP.NET MVC core. And this also has its own versions. So be careful about how you're accessing this. before we get into any code, we can quickly look at an overview of what is the ASP.NET MVC, structure out here. First thing is, I believe you would have been introduced to the MVC concept of, having a model, a view, and a controller, and each one doing separate tasks. So in the MVC pattern, your application is broken up into three main parts. One is the model, one is the view, and one is the controller. Now, you'll often hear this term using MVC. You want to achieve a separation of concerns. Separation of concerns is each one doing a certain task that is assigned to them and doing only that task and doing it well. So the model does what it's supposed to do, controller does what it's supposed to do, and the view does what it's supposed to do without interfering with the other. Right? Even when I sort of introduced earlier some of the concepts with you, I asked you in your mind to be very clear, what are the developer section of the code and what are the user section of the code. Right? So similarly here, they're saying what? That's not the same, of course, but they're saying that make sure that you do the task what is assigned to you in that particular component. Right? So we'll see what are each one's tasks. But using this pattern, user requests are routed first to the controller. So the user would type in the browser www.xyz.com/whatever. And when he presses enter, that URL would be sent to your ASP. Would be sent to the server, would be sent to your application. From your application, once your application receives it, it goes to the controller. The controller is the start point, you can think of it this way. And start point for your business logic where you're processing the code. And in the controller, okay, you would have different methods which correspond to the URLs that you have. So based on the URL, one of the methods in the controller will be called. And what you would do in here is you will write code to pick up one of the models that you are using, retrieve whatever data that you want from that model, and the data that you have retrieved, you pass it to a view. So this is what you'll be doing here in the
MVC.
Controller section of your code. Controller is literally controlling whom to pick up and how to pass the values to the other one. Hence the name controller. Okay. Let's look at what the model does out here for you. So the model in the MVC application represents the state of the application. Another word for state. What do you mean by state? Another word, easier word for state.
Status.
The data. Whatever data you want to show, whatever data you want to hold is called as the state. Now, what if I told you have already created the model on day one of a training, or day 2, whatever? You already created the model. So everything that you've been doing so far in here in the last 12 days is code that you will write in the model. So the model is nothing else but a class that you will have, which will represent the data. For example, let's say if you took the employee class, what are the data that the employee class is holding? Employee number, name, basic, department number. So this is the state of your application. This is the data that you are holding in the application. Along with the data, any business logic that it might have. So if you've written that method, calculate net salary, that is business logic that's working on the data and returning some other value or whatever. So that would be an example of the business logic that you wrote. Or any operations that should be performed. Another part of business logic would be the property validations that you're writing. All of this you all have been doing from day one. So you all are ready. I don't need to teach you anything about the model. Model you already know, right? Business logic should be encapsulated in the model along with any implementation logic for persisting the state of the application. Another word for persisting the state. Persisting means what? Another word for persisting.
Retaining.
Saving. Saving the state. When you persist something, you're saving it. Now, where can you save it? You could save it to a file if you want to. You can save it to a database if you want to. So wherever you're saving it, you're persisting that data. Now, what we have done yesterday were operations for persisting the state of the application. So the insert method that you wrote, update, delete, or the select, which is retrieving the state, all of these are things that you will require to put in the model. Right? So all these days, the first few days, first whatever, 10, 11 days that we worked with, we are looking at the model, we're looking at how you can write business logic, this sort of relation between models, what are the things that you can do. And then what we're doing out here yesterday, what have we done? Finally, when we connect to the database, we have seen how to persist the state or retrieve the values out. That's what your model class will be doing. So you already know the code. That's what I've been trying to tell you. All the code that we have done in the last 11 days, instead of doing in a console app, we could have opened the ASP.NET MVC app and say, okay, now we'll create a model and let's see the whole thing. But that could have been a little more difficult to understand, because then you would not have focused on that. You would have had to learn too many things at the same time. So all that we have done is built the base, and now it becomes easy for you to write the code. Provided, of course, you know the previous code. All right. Okay, now this last line out here, I'll come back to that later. At this point, it may not make a sense of you. Something called as a strongly typed view typically use view model types designed to contain the data to display in that view. So there are two words that are being used here. One is a strongly typed view and second is a view model. We'll see both of these words. So, just the back of your mind, this term, what is a strongly typed view? We'll describe it later when we are actually, going into the code and seeing that. And the second thing is, what is the concept of a view model? How it works. So I will explain that at the later point. At this point, talking about this makes no sense whatsoever to you. Moving on to the view. View is what the end user would be seeing finally. The views are responsible for presenting content through the UI. Typically, what will the end in a web-based application? What will the end user get to see? Finally, what does he see out there?
Web page.
Yeah. So what is there in the web? What is the web page made up of? Basic. Any web page contains what?
HTML, CSS.
HTML. Along with the associated technologies, how to present that HTML with CSS, how to validate that HTML with JavaScript. Right? You might have different other frameworks, JavaScript frameworks, which do additional things for you. So all of that would be there in here. That will be there in the view. So these are technologies that you would have learned before you entered the .NET module. And those same technologies can be used out. Right? Okay, now, in addition to the HTML that you're writing down, the HTML that you're creating may not be only, the view that you're creating may not only contain static content. Like, for example, if I give you your, mail inbox, Google inbox. So if I open my inbox, I get to see a different set of data out there. You get to see a different data. So the values that are there, you're seeing your inbox, I'm seeing my inbox. So how is the inbox being created? It's obviously not a static page. So there's code that has been written there, which says what? Read through all your mails in a loop, and one by one show each mail on a separate line. Supposing you've got 20 mails, all 20 mails will be shown there. You've got 15 mails. For me, 15 times that same code would run in a loop. So there would be server-side code that you will write, which writes code to output HTML to the end user. So to what goes in the browser, you'll be writing server-side code to manipulate this HTML and to form this HTML dynamically based on different conditions. Now, how do we write this code? The good news for you is you'll write it with C# syntax. So whatever we learned in C# is now going to be useful to put onto the view also. You'll be using C# syntaxes to write that code. So everything that we learned from day 1 to day 10 is all going to be used out here. Everything is required. Everything is useful. Right? Now, when you write the C# code on that view, this has to be, processed. This has to be, compiled. And to run your code, you have something called as a Razor View Engine. So the Razor View Engine is able to run code written in the language that you are coding in. So if you're coding in C#, for example, this would be, the Razor View Engine will use a C# compiler to compile your code. If you're writing code in VB.NET, it will then use the VB.NET compiler to compile your code. So this Razor View Engine recognizes the language that you choose to write. All right. And any such code, you're writing C# code, but any such code which is being compiled by the Razor View Engine is also called as Razor code. So when I say you're writing Razor code, don't feel we have to learn something different. We've been doing this over the last 10 days, 12 days, whatever number of days that we had. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, we talked about separation of concerns, and that's the same point being made here. There should be minimal logic within the views. And any logic in there should be only related to presenting content. So don't create, let's say if I wanted to read a value from the database, don't write code in the view to do that. Who should write code to read the value from the database? Where should we write that code?
In model.
In the model. And then who will, send this data to the view, whatever is there in the model, who will send it to the view?
Controller.
That will be the job of the controller. So can I also write that code in the view if I want to? Yes, I can. Is that syntactically wrong? No, it isn't. But then you're not achieving separation of concerns. That's the idea behind this. Are we clear on this? The controller itself. The controller is the component that handles user interaction. Right. So when you're talking about user interaction, we are talking about receiving a request from the user and sending back a response. So maybe reading some values from that request, whatever values you want to read, and then sending back a response to the user. Secondly, they work with the model. So the controller will decide which model to load and ultimately select a view to render. Right. Now, everything else is the rehash of things we have said. So I'll quickly read through that. In an MVC application, the view only displays the information. The controller handles and responds to user input and interaction. We've said that before. In the MVC pattern, the controller is the initial entry point and is responsible for selecting which model type to work with and which view to render. Hence its name, it controls how the application responds to a given request. So these are some of the basic concepts of MVC that we need to look at before we get into any real code on that. So what I'd like you to do is for this section, I'm going to be doing a lot of talking and very little coding. Okay. We'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll start off. But what I want you all to do is I want you all to code with me. So before we go for a break, let's just create the application and then it'll take 2-3 minutes to load whatever. We can go for a break in that. So go in for a new project and look out for a web-based application and look out for a MVC application. So here ASP.NET Core Web App into bracket model view controller. That's the type of application that I want you to select. Okay, make sure it shows you into bracket model view controller. Make sure the word core is there. Right? Select next. All right, now I'm going to make a small change in the structure of how I'm saving it. All my websites, I'm going to create here in a folder called websites. The reason being, I may not necessarily finish coding with one website on one day. I might require the same website on the next day to add more features to it. So I'm going to just create a folder called websites and keep adding different websites to it. And I will not create a different folder for the solution. Instead, I'm saying place the solution and the project in the same directory. Okay, so this is what we're doing out here. Project name, I'm not changing. First project is like going to be like a Hello World project. I'm keeping the name as Web Application 1 itself. I haven't changed the name. When you choose the next option, it will prompt you with which framework you want to use. And because I'm doing all these trainings and most of my trainings right now are with CDAC with .NET 6, I have uninstalled the 7 part of it. I have not got that. But some of you all, if you have installed the latest version, will get 7 also. .NET 7 also. So choose .NET 6 because some of the settings in 6 do not work the same way in 7. You're going to be tested on 6 and not 7. So features in 6 should work in 7, but some of the settings are different. So which is why we are taking this. Authentication type, and I hope to cover that in one of the later sessions. So right now we're keeping it as none, but you have some inbuilt authentication options available to you. So I'll just keep that as none right now. Then you have an option here whether you want to configure for HTTPS. If you say yes, then you need a certificate, saying that your site is actually safe to run. You need a digital certificate to do that. In a real world application, you need to have an external authority which gives you a certificate, a digital certificate saying that your site is safe. If you are doing this locally in a local application that you're creating, the first time that you run your code, it will prompt you that it doesn't have a certificate. Do you want me to generate a certificate? And if you say yes, it's like you yourself are certifying that it is available or it is safe for working. So this certificate is not valid outside your local machine. It is only valid for your local machine. Right? So sometimes it creates a little problem and all that. So I prefer working without a certificate. And I'm saying I don't configure this for HTTPS. Now, some of the other options that we're using, we will need to do that. So later we'll see what happens when we configure it. Right now, sometimes by mistake, if you forget to uncheck it and you go into this, first time you run, it will prompt you, do you want me to take a default certificate for you? So just say yes, and it will install that default certificate for you. All right. I will suggest don't configure for HTTPS, because it's easier to do it that way, because we are anyway not seeing any of those features right now. But I'm also telling you that by mistake, if you've gone into it, it might give you that warning. So just say okay to that one. Okay, Docker is something that we're not going into. You would be having a sessions on cloud and you'll understand what is Docker and whatnot. So that's beyond the scope of our syllabus in this CDAC session. So I'm not using Docker. And the last option, same as before, do not use top level statements. So if you use that, what happens? Have you seen this
No, sir.
all through? I have not shown you at all. No?
No, sir.
Okay, much pending. What it does is effectively, it does not generate a namespace, it does not generate a class, and it does not generate a main. It does not show you that in the code. So you can write the code normally, just like you normally would write code. But when you compile the code behind the scenes in your ILDSM, you'll find it generates all three for you. It generates the namespace also, generates the class also, and generates the function main also, static void main also. So it doesn't show you that code, but the compiler is generating it for you. That's what that's what top level statements does for you. If you say do not use top level statement, then it generates the code for you. So I prefer you knowing about what you're doing, which is why I've been giving this option also. But maybe we'll, not right now, but maybe one of the later options, we'll see what happens when you don't check that. And you create this. All right. Now this will take its own time to create. Okay, an explanation of what is happening there and all that. We'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and work with this. Right? So it's about 12 o'clock, 12:05 we'll start off, or 12:01, 12:06 we'll start off the session. Take a quick 5-minute break. All right, back here, please. So just before the break, we had started off on a new project. And when you come with a new project, there are a lot of changes that you would see out here from your console apps. So let's see from a few of the changes that have come in here. First thing, if you notice the different dependencies, and if you look at the frameworks, now you also have what Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.app. So there'll be a lot of assemblies added for ASP.NET Core. So a lot of these are added out here. Okay, and these are some of the files that we'll be using out here. Like for example, Microsoft.ASP.ASP.NET Core.MVC.core, right, or .MVC or .MVC.razor, right? Later we'll see tag helpers, and then you have different options out here that you would be using out here. So notice that it has added a lot more libraries. Not that I want to do anything with them, but just be aware of that. Secondly, let's go through the project structure and try and understand what each of these is doing. So first, one thing that you can clearly identify and clearly understand is the 3 folders out here for models, views, and controllers. Currently, the model has one model in it, and we're not really using this model for anything right now. We'll come back to this. So let's look at the controllers first. That's the first start point. But before we do that, again, let us see this. So you have a folder here called www root. Okay. And this corresponds to the root folder of your application. Root folder as in when your application starts, this is the start point of your application. And any static files should be placed here in this folder. So supposing you want to create only a HTML file, simple HTML file, then it should be placed here in this folder. There are some files that are already been added out here. So let's look at some of the files that have been added. Firstly, there is a .css file that is being used by this website. Secondly, there are some, site.js. Now, if you open this, you can write your own code out here. If you look at the CSS file, some settings are there, but you can give in your own options out here. And the third folder is something that is of interest to us. There are the lib folder where there are certain predefined files that have been already added, which your file is using, which your code is using. So if you see that the two things that it is using, one is Bootstrap and one is jQuery. So the files required for Bootstrap, right? The CSS files, the JS files required for Bootstrap, and similarly the files required for jQuery. All of these are actually being added out here by default for you. So these are the libraries that have been added for you. So later in our code, there will be a reference to these libraries. And these libraries are all already there in your www root folder, which you can add more files. Supposing you are trying to add an image file, supposing you are trying to add a HTML file, all your image files, HTML files, any other files should be added to this www root folder. Okay. Now, there's also, I'll come to controllers, models, and views last. There's also app settings.json file. As the name suggests, all your settings for the current application are all specified out here. So we are going to make changes in this file also as we go along. For example, one of the changes that we'll be making is the connection string that we'll use. We'll read it from this file. This is a JSON file, a key value pair out here. So what is the advantage of not hard coding your connection string, but using it from the JSON file is that on deployment, after deployment, if you want to change the value, see your development machine will be different, but your deployment machine will be different. So when you deploy your file, you will need to make changes in the connection string to say, okay, this is the where the database is located and all that. So instead of hard coding it in the code, ideally we should be reading it from the connection from the JSON file. Right. So we will make changes in this as we go along. Right. And there's a program.cs file. Let's see this program.cs file. So this program.cs file would be the first file that runs when you run it, and you notice it also has a main in it. So whenever a request comes to your application, right? Whenever a request comes to your application, the first thing that it does is it comes to your server. Now from the server, it reaches your application. In between the server and your application exists what is known as the application pipeline. So if you have to diagrammatically represent this, this could be a browser sending the request. Browser sending the request. Right? Request coming first to whom? First, this thing will be handled by the web server. Now the web server is now going to send this to your application that is running. right? The web server is going to send the request to your application, right? And between the web server and the application, this here, what you see out here is the pipeline, is the application pipeline. Okay. So this application pipeline is a set of software that will run before your application can process the request. Right. Now this pipeline can be configured by you. You can specify what is going to happen in that application pipeline. So there it goes to the application pipeline, it goes to the application, and from here, the application would have different controllers. Right. So this is your controller out here. Right. And from here, it's actually the request is actually going to your controller based on the URL that you're sending. So when you send the request, let's say with the request, you're specifying some URL. So based on the URL, the controller would be selected, and the controller now would have different methods in there. Okay, these methods are called action methods. So let's say method 1, right? Again, which method to call is now being picked up from the URL. So this is how it's going. So the point I'm making is between your server to your application is your application pipeline. And this application pipeline consists of different what is known as middleware. So there'll be two things out here. There'll be a service and there is a middleware. Two separate sections out here. Okay. So first thing is you need to configure which services you want out there. Secondly, you need to configure what middleware you're using. Middleware and services both are software that you're using. Now, all the code that you see here, that you see in the main, is code that is specifying what services to use and what is the middleware that your application that you need to use out here. What are how to create the pipeline for your application. As I said, this is entirely configurable. So Visual Studio has given some default options for you. And as you keep using newer options, you will have to keep adding newer features out here. So these are the basic options that every application needs that Visual Studio is already configured for you. But as we go into more advanced options, you will have to do the configuration yourself. Are we clear on what we're doing out here? What exactly is happening out here?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'll use this term quite frequently. I will use the term service. You'll have to add services out here. Secondly, I'll say you'll need to use this middleware. I'll say you need to configure the app pipeline. When I do this, you need to be able to relate to these terms what we are talking.
Sir, can you tell us a little bit about app pipeline?
I'm saying app pipeline is a series of steps that you need to go through before your app request reaches your application. Now, we'll see an example of what are the steps. Basically, what software you need to configure. It is totally configurable. It's not fixed. It's like a plug and play. It's saying, okay, I want to use this feature, use this. Use this feature, use this. Use this feature, use this. So what are the features? We'll see them as we go along in our code. But essentially, what all software that you need to use is your pipeline. The pipeline is customizable.
Okay.
All right. So keeping that in mind, let's try and understand what is happening here. So you have something called as a web application builder. If you look at this builder, there's something of type web application builder. So the web application dot create builder method returns a web app. Ideally, they should have, I don't know why they do this, but they should have kept these names out here. So you know exactly what is happening out here. Okay. So you're creating a web application builder. The web application builder, as the name suggests, builds your, the services and the pipeline that your application requires. Okay. It was actually where I'm not changing the code. I'll keep it the way, otherwise it'll be confusing for you when you look at it. But what I'd like you to do is when you're looking at it in your machine, to notice what it returns. So it is returning Microsoft.asp.net, ASP.NET Core.builder.web application builder. And this web builder application builder is the one that is configuring your web application. So be aware of these terms. I don't like the code that they're generating. I don't like the var that they're writing. So I'm not changing it, but I want you to know what it is. If you want, you can write a comment below it in your code. What is that written? Okay. Now we talked about dependency injection, right? So there is a dependency injection controller that is there in ASP.NET MVC. Now, whatever services that I'm adding out here, if those services require some dependency injection to be inserted in your code, this is the code. The builder is the code that is doing that for you. The builder will contain what? A dependency injection container, which will insert whatever objects that you need in your code. So this is being done for you out here. We'll see an example of what objects we need as we go along. We'll see. So who's doing all the dirty work for you is this, web application builder. So it's creating whatever services that you need. It's creating an object of that type and passing it to you through dependency injection. If you require dependency injection. Am I clear on this aspect? Are we clear on this? So what is one of the roles when you're using a service? What is it doing for you? You're just saying, I want to use the service. But internally, it is now that service is having some, options that it needs to use. So creation of those options and passing the object to you is being done behind the scenes using DI. So your jobs are being simplified. Otherwise, what would you would have to do? Supposing you want to use the service and if DI was not available, then what will you need to do then?
Create object of everything that we need.
And write the complex code that that object requires. So they have made this easy for you. All right. So what are the things that it's doing? One of the things that service is adding is what? Add controllers with views. So it's enabling you to use controllers in your application. If you don't have this, then you can't use the controllers. Are we clear on this, everybody? Now, this code is being auto-generated for you. In earlier versions of ASP.NET MVC, we had to write down all this code. So we would have to write it down earlier. Now, of course, Visual Studio generates this code for you. So again, this has becoming a little easier. So you don't need to pay a lot of attention to this. But if you look at the documentation describes what are the steps that you need to take, which step you need to take first, which step you need to take second. Now I'm saying you don't need to worry about that because why? Because all this code is being added for you. Okay. So first thing is that, enable controllers. As we go along, we'll be using more services. So that again will be clearer. Like for example, if you're using the entity framework, you have to add the service for entity framework. If you're using something called sessions, you'll be using sessions later. You'll have to enable sessions here by adding a service for that. If you're using caching, you'll have to use a service for caching. And the objects that you need in your code for caching, for let's say session management, all of that will be inserted into your code using DI. If you're using entity framework, that object of the type entity framework will be inserted into your code using DI. That's what we'll be doing first. First is adding the service. Now, this is just one service being added, but you can add all the other services and build the web application here at this point. The next part, what are we doing here? Again, we are configuring the HTTP request pipeline. So once you added the services, now the pipeline can be configured because the service that you're adding might be required in the pipeline. So first add the service, then configure the pipeline. What are we using in the pipeline? Middleware. Middleware is what? Software that would be used in the pipeline that you can configure. What do you need or what do you not need? Are we clear on this, everybody? All right. If there are any questions, please ask me questions because that would help me gauge whether you are able to understand, not understand, whatever the thing is. Okay. So this here is, so we have got here firstly an app which is of type web application. Okay, this was a method called builder.build, which gave you a web application, and everywhere we're going to do an app dot web application dot and use one of these methods out here. So this is to do with if an error occurs, if an unhandled exception occurs, I'll put it this way, then what message do you want to show? Right? So what this code is doing is it's saying that if you're in the development mode, then show the actual error message that occurred to the developer. Show the actual message. Show him actually why the thing failed. But if you're in run mode, if you're in the deployment mode, if you already deployed an application, then don't show why the error occurred. Just show a pretty page which says what? Oh, I'm so sorry. There's an exception that occurred in your application. Please contact the system administrator. So you don't want to scare off the end user. But if you're in the development mode, you would like to see what is the actual error message. So we'll see this as we are running the code. We'll see this. But if you're not in the development mode, what is it using? It's using this exception handler. And I'll show you where this is coming up. I'll show you where this is actually coming up out there. All right. Second thing is this web application dot use static files. Now, what are these static files? These files under www root. So to enable this www root folder, you have to call this static files method. If you don't enable this, that means it will not be able to process and will not be able to recognize the files that are in the www root. So that's the method that we're using for enabling, static content. Like what are the examples of static content we saw? CSS, JS, any other HTML files, any other images, whatever files that you're placing in this folder out here. Second thing is use routing. So these are default options that are being generated. So when the request comes to your controller, it will recognize it based on a route that you have configured. So you need to configure what are the valid routes, what are the valid URLs, what are the URL pattern that you're receiving. Is it valid or not? So for using routing, this is what you're specifying out here. A little later, we'll be looking at something called as attribute routing. There will be using a different options for that. But this is for configuring your route. Route is nothing else but how should your URL be framed. Next one, use authorization. If you are using, security management features, then you need to enable that. The authorization deals with when the user is trying to access a resource. If he's not logged in, then what should happen? If he's logged in, then what should happen? How should it react? So all of that comes in under authorization. And finally, this is one of the routes that we have created. Okay. So route is what is a valid URL that you are specifying out here. What is the valid URL
Sir?
that we are? Yes.
So can you repeat the explanation for the static files and use routing.
So I'm saying that I
So
initially
what I
told
got
you
was static is used for actually getting the files from the www root file.
for enabling the root www root folder. If you don't enable use static files, then if you try to access it, it'll give you an unauthorized error. It will not recognize those static files. Okay. You can do one thing. When we run this code, we will add a static file. We'll try accessing it, and then we'll remove this option and show you what happens out.
Okay, sir. And so for the
Okay.
routing, sir.
Basically, the URL.
Hmm.
We can configure what are the valid URLs here in map controller root.
Okay, sir.
So for you to be able to work with this, you need to enable this routing out here. For this setting to work, this needs
Okay,
to
sir.
work first.
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, I said that there will be one more routing option available wherein you're using what is known as attribute routing. And for attribute routing, we'll use a different setting, but I'll do that later. Right now, we're just sort of starting off with the hello world type example. More complex concepts we'll cover as we are going along.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
So
here,
one doubt actually. If can we add a port number also, or it runs on a fixed port or something?
no, the application here will run on a randomly selected port out here. So it does not, right now, you're not deploying the application anywhere. It is creating a dummy, web server, which is running the application for you. But the point that you're making has to do with deployment. When you're ready to deploy your application, that's when you can choose where to deploy it. That is not to do with the development mode.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Development and deployment would be two similar, separate concepts. So you do development with whatever the default port number that assigns. But when you're deploying it, that's when all those other things would come in. Where do you want to deploy it? What is the IP address? What is the port number? All of that can be done in the deployment section.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I was talking about routing and how you can specify a route pattern. So they have decided a specific pattern for you, which says controller/action/ID. And I'll come back to this. We're going to spend a lot of time on doing this, but let me first show you the controller. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to understand what this route is. So essentially, you're defined what are the valid URL patterns for your this thing. Now you can add more if you want to. Just like you can add this, you can add, let's say a second route with some other pattern out here. So we'll see how to add our own routes. Okay, but you can add a multiple. This is like multiple values that can be added. And every route that we are adding needs a name and the pattern. It's like a key value pair. It's like what is the name of the route and what is the pattern. So this is the first thing that would run. Once this app.run comes, this is actually, we are saying the application is currently now running, and whatever request has now come in is now been transferred to your controller. The first thing it will check whether it's following a correct pattern, what you're given in here. If the pattern that you're got in the URL matches this pattern, then we'll go to the next step. We'll go to the controller. So let's look at the controller. It has created a default controller for you with some dummy code. All controllers in here would inherit from the controller class. Right? All controllers that you create here inherit from the controller class. What is the first thing that you see out here? What is this? The public home controller. What is this? Yeah. What is public home controller? Yes.
Name of the class home controller inheriting the controller class.
So what is this? What are we writing? Why are you giving
Constructor.
such a long? Yeah.
Constructor.
Why are you giving such a long explanation? Name of the controller class, then writing a method. One word, it's the constructor,
Constructor.
right? So we're creating a constructor here. We're not creating, they are creating, which is receiving an object of type iLogger. The logging here is to deal with logging information. If you're keeping track of events on how it happens and whatnot. So there's this logger that is being passed to you in your constructor. And I have a private variable here where I'm saying underscore logger equal to the logger that I've received here from my constructor. So first question, what is this an example of? What is happening here? What is this an
Login
example?
page.
Sorry?
Login page.
No.
A constructor,
Constructor
DI.
injection.
Basically DI, dependency
Okay.
injection. So the object you require for logging, not login, login. Logging, Logging, logging maybe an event that happens or an error that occurs or whatever. So you'd have different methods out here in this underscore logger, for example. So underscore logger dot whatever log that you want to do, whatever you want to write some code, whatever message that you want to write, that can be logged out here. Okay, and where to log and all of that, you can see that later. But essentially logging, Logging information, not login, not Login. That information can be used with the logger out here. So they're giving a logger object where you can log all the events that happen in this. This happened, that happened, this happened, that happened. Can be done out here. So I didn't need to create a logger. Who created that for me? Through DI. So like this, you'll get a lot of code which is available to you through DI. I don't need logging information right now. But look at the other methods out here. Look at the other methods out here. Now these are what are referred to your action method as your action methods. So they have created three basic methods for you: index, privacy, and error. The error page, this is the name of the controller is home. The error page would be shown to you, home/error page. When what? When what?
There is an exception.
Exception is highlighted.
Unhandled exception. See the word unhandled exception. When there's an unhandled exception that occurs, and when what? And when?
App is not
Is
in development
is
mode.
development.
When you're not in development mode. In other words, when you've deployed your application. So which page will it show? It will show you this, whatever is there in home/error. It will do whatever is there in home/error. And that's the code that you're doing out here. All right. Now coming back to this. This here would now correspond to how your URL is being given. So your URL that you're receiving will first contain the name of the controller. Will contain the name of the controller. And the second thing it will contain is the name of your action method. So action method here is this action method. What is the name of the action method? Index or privacy.
Index.
Okay, or error for that matter. Now the name of the controller, I don't know if they've noticed, this has a suffix of controller, but while calling it in your code, they're not using the suffix. They're only calling it as what? As home. But while writing this, they're writing it as home controller. So while giving the names, when we are going to create our own controllers, you need to remember this, that the controller needs to have a suffix of controller. Are we clear on this, everybody? So if you're creating a controller called X, don't call it X, call it X controller. All right. There's a lot of pandas coming your way. Let's run this page once. I'm sure you're itching to run it once and see what is happening. And that will help you understand a little better. Now, when you run it once, right, it's running on a default web server that is created for you using a random port that is available. Right. So localhost / whatever, localhost : 5108. That's the port number that is created for you. Okay. And this is the default page that is shown to you. This page that you are seeing is actually the index page. This one here. Similarly, there's a privacy page and there's a link to privacy. So home/privacy, or go to the home, it's showing you this page. So let's try and understand where this is all coming in from. Okay, let's see where this is coming in from. First thing is, how did it run the index page by default? How did it pick up the index page? How did it pick up home by default? This is because of this option here. We said that if nothing is given, if you don't give the controller, then the default controller is called what?
Home controller.
Home.
Home controller.
Right? Don't use the word home controller, just say home. Right? Is home. And the default action is index. What if I change this to privacy? What will happen now? When I run this out here, by default, if nothing is given in the URL, by default, it will not show you the index page. Instead, it will show you what?
Privacy.
Which page is it showing?
Privacy.
Privacy page. And now if I want to go to index, now how do I go to index? I say /home/index.
Index.
What is the first slash here? What is the first part here?
Home.
What is home? What is
Controller.
that? Controller. So where is this coming in from? This is coming from the URL pattern that we are given, where we are saying that the first option given here is going to be the controller. Then you have a slash. What is the second option given here?
Privacy action.
Name of the action method. Which is the second action method you want to take up? And what is the third option shown out here? Third option shown here is what? You can pass something called as ID to it, a variable called ID to it, which currently is not being passed, but is being allowed because of the question mark there. Question mark there indicates that it is an optional value. So you don't need to pass the ID. But these two are not optional. These two are, required. If you don't pass it, it's taking it as home. If you don't pass it, it's taking it as privacy. If you don't pass this is being received as null. So if I had to go to home/index, now this will take me to home/index. If I wanted to go to home/privacy, this will take me to home/privacy. If I give only home, right now, where will it take me to? If I give only home, where will it take me to right now?
To the home controller.
Home controller.
Yeah, but which method?
Privacy.
Privacy.
Why is privacy method? Because this is the default method here. So if I give only home, it's again taking me to privacy. If I don't give home also, where will it take me to? If I don't give home
Privacy.
also. Home/privacy again. Why home/privacy? Because that's the default option here,
Because default.
right? Earlier it was what? Earlier it was index. If I don't give anything, it's taking it as what? Home/index. If I want to, I can now go to home/home, or I can go to home/index. Even this is okay with you. Okay, now how do I go to privacy? Home/privacy, I'll have to explicitly give in this. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So how do you change the default option that you want? You can give it here in the map controller out. The default option that you want. Now, second thing, when you go to index, what is this returning here? Returning the view.
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 Now, where are the views shown? If you go into the views will be shown in this folder for views. And there will be a view with the name of the controller. So if I have a controller called home controller, there's a folder under views called home, which has what under it? What are these now?
Index and privacy.
And privacy.
These are the actual views that you will see out here. These have an extension of CS/HTML. So these are actually, your Razor pages. Your Razor pages will have an extension of CS/HTML because we are coding in C#. If you're coding in VB.NET, the extension would have been VB.HTML. Are we clear on this, everybody? So this is your Razor page. What will this page contain? What will this view contain? A combination of HTML code plus Razor code. Let's go into index.cs/html. Now, any Razor code that you have, any Razor block that you have, will be given with @ Will be given with @. So in this Razor block, I can put in whatever C# code that I know of. Right? What is this an example of? This all this is C# code. So all this code that you're writing will come in here in the Razor. Clear on this, everybody?
Sir, then what is there in the view root file?
In the
That root file,
which
in
root file?
root folder, there is a root,
Web root, I think.
web root, www.
That is any additional files that you create, which are not views, any static files.
But
Okay,
sir, you
if-
mentioned that in that folder we can save HTML. We have HTML, CSS files. Same here, we are also having the same thing.
Here, this is not a static file. No? There is a difference. This is a file that has Razor code also enabled in it.
Okay,
That file will have static content.
suppose
I
I
told you
have
that-
to apply CSS to this index CSS/HTML, then
Yes, like this is normal HTML file. You can create anything that you want here. Any CSS that you learned, you can do that here.
okay, that CSS file should be in www root.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. So it's a combination of Razor code and HTML code. And this is the page that you saw. Now let me run this again. And you got to see home/index. But is this the code that we saw? Is this the code that we saw? What is this showing you? This is only showing you what? The welcome. See, that's line number 6. And that learn about building applications with ASP.NET. All right. So this is the only code that we saw. These are the only 2 things that we saw. But there are so many other things there, no, on that page. So where are these things coming in from? The index page doesn't contain all of this. The index.cs/html is containing what? Only these 4 lines. But if you look at the view source, when you're working with this, your best friend is going to be a view source. View source will tell you a lot of information. If you look at the view page source, the view page source has a lot of other things that are happening in there. You see this doc type HTML, and then which style sheet to use. Where is it using it? lib/bootstrap/ so www.lib/bootstrap/dist/css/ whatever the file name that you wanted. You understood where it's picking it up from? Who was asking the question a minute back?
Yes, sir. Got it.
Okay. So my question is, where is all this code? I have not given all this code. I have not typed out any of that. What do you get to see only? You only get to see these 4 lines. And these 4 lines are coming somewhere later here, line number 36. So this is what the index page that we created had. But there is so much code before line 36 and so much code after line 36. So where is all this coming from? Let's examine this. So if you look into your folder structure, there is a file called viewstart.cshtml. The file called viewstart.cshtml. And in that viewstart.cshtml file, there is one instruction. So this again, the @ block indicates what? This is a Razor code, this is server code, it's not HTML code. So there's a instruction here which says what? Layout is equal to _layout. So it says use this layout. So what is this concept of a layout? A layout is a file that will be used in combination with your view. So view will use a layout and the output of the layout and the view will be merged together, like what we saw. We only saw what? This is the only content that we had there. But this content is using a view. Which view? Which view is it using?
Layout.
_layout. Where is this instruction coming? In a file called _viewstart.cshtml. So the default view, the viewstart is the first file that runs. And which layout to use is given out here. The default layout is given out here. And this my index file is using that layout, even though I've not given it. It's using it because the instruction has come in here. And where is this layout created? If you look at, there is a shared folder. In the shared folder, there is a layout.cshtml. Right? And if you open that layout.cshtml, now all the content that you saw was from this file. So whatever you saw there, you remember what you saw sometime back? Line number 36 showed you what? The actual content that you had. But there was so much other content before line 36. So all of that came in from here. And there was some content after line 36 also. So that content came in from here. So let's look at line 36. In fact, it's 35 here. Let's look at line 35. What happened here? So what has come in here? What instruction has come in here is a render body. So now how would it look? So the layout would look like this. So this is the layout page. Okay. The layout page would have initial code and then later code. And then there's somewhere in there's going to be a @render body. @render body. Now, when you do a @render body, what this would do is, supposing this is the code for index.cshtml. Supposing this is 3 lines, A, B, and C. Right? So this initial part was your layout page. This part was your .cshtml file. So the output that you get would be the output from the layout page And wherever you see the render body, that will be replaced with what? That will be replaced with what? The code from the index page. So this is how you get to see the code. Have you understood what has happened here?
Yes, sir.
Can you repeat it once again, sir?
You need to look at what I'm doing. You cannot be not looking and not listening to what I'm doing. Please pay attention to what I am doing out here. Look at what I'm doing out here, because it'll be absolutely clear. It's just a copy paste operation. I'm saying this was your layout page. This was your index page, whatever the code on the index page. Now in the layout page, there's an instruction which says what? Render body. So the output of this index page, see the index page says I'm using the layout page. Where does that line come in? Where does the index page say I'm using the layout page? This line has come in here. Layout is equal to underscore layout. So all your pages, I'm going to use this layout right now. And what it will simply do is when you try to read the index view, it'll take the code from the layout page, this is the same code from the layout page, and the code from the index page would be inserted where your @render body is. That is how your code would come out. So it's a mix of your index and your layout page. So the layout page allows you to give a common structure to all the pages that you have out here. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, yes, sir.
So at line number 35 on the layout page, there's a line which says render body. So what is it going to do? It's just going to pick up all the content from here. It'll copy this content and replace it with, replace render body with this content. This is what is happening. Now this code will not be shown to the browser. This code will not be shown to the browser because this is @ is what is your Razor code that's going to run the server. So this is what the browser would get. Are we clear on this, everybody? This is how the browser got down. Right? Questions, if any?
So can you tell us a little about Razor code? So why it is called Razor? First,
That's just the name of the engine. I don't know why they have named it Razor.
thanks.
I have no clue on why they decided. Maybe because it's very sharp. I don't know. I can't, that's a silly answer that I'm giving you, but obviously I don't know why they've called it Razor. There's no reason for calling it Razor.
Okay.
Right? They've given it a name. There's nothing to know. You already know Razor code. The good news is you already are an expert at Razor code. Why? Why am I saying that?
Because we are good with
Because you know HTML, CSS.
Not HTML, CSS. No.
C# code.
C#. Razor code is C#. You're going to write C# code. If you know how to write C# code, you already know how to work with Razor. It's just the name of the engine that is processing the C# code on that page, which is mixed with HTML.
And so if we have to actually create the front end in React, so we have to make changes in the layout, right? Or add a layout to this page.
So firstly, if you're writing code in React, you will not use these type of pages. You have single page applications out here.
Okay, sir.
So concept will be similar, but a different project structure. So my problem is, I'll tell you what my problem is. My problem is they have given me 2 weeks and then they say, okay, let's get them to do a project. Let's get them to do this. Let's use Angular in this. Let's use React in this. And I say, I'm not going to teach them that. No problem. They'll do it on their own. That is my problem. My problem is this requires me 2 months, 2.5 months of training time to answer the type of questions that you are answering, that you expect at the end of this.
Yes.
That is my issue. My issue is not is not the can it be done, can it not be done by you. My issue is if you need 50 tools and if I give you 3 tools, I can't expect you to give me the output that you should know after knowing 50 tools. That is
Yes.
my issue. All right. So can it be done? Yes, it can be done. Can it be done with the 1.5 day session I'm going to do with you? Most definitely not.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's get back to doing this. What are we doing here in this case? We are using a layout page. Now, what if there was a line out here which said what? Layout equal to underscore layout. And this, of course, is C# code. What if I did this? You don't use the layout. This is C# code, so you're experts at this. What is layout actually? Layout is of type, razor base page dot layout. It's giving you, a property called layout. So what if I did this? And I now ran my home controller. I ran this index page out here. What would happen now? Come on, quickly, before the output comes. Tell me the answer. Before the output comes.
No
navigation bar.
Page. No
Yeah.
navigation bar.
It won't use that layout page. This is what you would get. So this is what you see now. This is not using the layout page. So this is the same index page that you saw. And if you look at view source, now what do you get to see here? What do you get to see here? The same 4 lines that we wrote out there without any of the extra code that we had out here. Are we clear on this, everybody? So that extra information is coming to you from the layout page, and that's basically just merging the things out. Okay, I'm removing this slide. I'm not saying do this, but this is what would be happening. Yes, clear. All right. So we've seen the index page. Similarly, the privacy page would have something similar. Again, what is the privacy page using the layout page? Yes, no. Privacy using the layout page or no?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Why? Why? Where is the default layout page given? In which file? In which file is it given? Quicker answers. Come on.
Shared file.
In viewstart.cshtml.
View start.
So viewstart.cshtml specifies the default layout for the website. And you can change it here if you want to and then work with it. Okay, can you make your own layout page? I don't want to use this layout page. Can you make your own layout page?
Yes, sir.
Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
What all
Yes,
would you
sir.
need to put on your layout page? To begin with, what do you need to put? You'll have to have the whole shebang. You'll have to have the whole what? Starting with header, HTML, doc type. What are these now? What are these? What are these lines?
Style sheet, bootstrap.
Right? Whatever style sheet you're using. Where are these coming in from? Where are this being used? This coming in where?
Lib.
In the
Root.
Web root.
www folder.
www root.
So you'll have to add whatever CSS files, any other files that you wanted. You can add them here. Right? Which CSS is it using? Look at this. href is equal to root folder. This is the root folder, right? So root folder /CSS /site.css. So these are the things that we have out here. Are we clear on this, everybody? Then after doing this, you create your body, whatever you want to create in the layout, common layout. And somewhere in the body, what will you need to also do? Somewhere in the body, what will you also need to render body? What does render body do? It takes the output from the page that you're trying to see and merges it into the layout page at this point of time. This is where the the other page is the content of the other index.cshtml, for example, is simply being copy pasted out here. It is just replacing the render body. Right? And then of course, if you had any other, footer, if you want, this is up to you. Now, this what you do is your way, baby. Again, what are these now? These are scripts that are running. You remember await? What is this doing? Render at the rate indicates this is what it's a razor call. Razor call meaning what? It's a C# code. Right? So at the rate await render section async scripts. So these scripts must be run out here in this case. So render the scripts out here so that it's waiting for you to do that before you go ahead with the rest of the code. So all of these settings that you're giving in here can be replicated with doing things out here for you. All right. Now, some of the things that are being generated here are not HTML. Like, for example, A. Now, this ASP-area, ASP-area, ASP-controller, ASP-action. So what are all of these? These are what are known as tag helpers. I don't know whether you remember, but in the dependencies, in one of the options there was a tag helper out there. I didn't know, I didn't tell you about this today. Okay, so there's a assembly for using the static files, and there's an assembly for using the tag helpers. It's been net core.tag helper. Where's the tag helper one? Yeah, tag helpers. So this tag helpers consist of options for adding. Now these are not HTML tags. These are additional tags that are going to be rendered at the server side. So when you do this ASP-, you're using a tag helper. And we have not covered areas as yet, but you should be able to understand this. What hyperlink is it generating? What hyperlink is generating? Home/action is here. What is privacy? Are you clear on this, everybody? So that's an example of a tag helper out here. Or there would be others as well here. In this case, forget the area. Home/ what are the action is taking it as index. So where it's showing you web application one, that's what it's showing you. What about this one here again? Another hyperlink here, which says what? Home/index, home/privacy. So when you run this page, when you run the index page, this is how it's getting rendered. All those tags, that web application one tag, that is how it's getting rendered. If you look at the view page source, what is it showing you out here? What is it showing you here? Href is equal to this root directory. Or if you look at the other tag helpers out here, href is equal to /home/privacy. So what are the /home out here? That was the controller. What are the /privacy out there? That was the action. So we wrote controller and action. ASP-, see, we wrote this, right? We didn't write /home/action. We wrote this. But it got rendered as what? Href equal to so and so. So who's generating this tag for you? This is being done for you by the tag helper. So tag helper will look at those ASP- commands and convert them to equivalent HTML code. Are we clear on what is happening out here?
Yes.
So we will be looking at certain tag helpers as we go along. I don't know that they're using a HTML helper out here. No, they are not using a HTML helper anywhere. Okay. Like I could have written the same thing with @HTML dot and generated a action link out here. Right? And whatever the link text and what is the action name and the controller name. So action name, for example, let's say index. So I could have done this as well. And this would have generated also a similar code out here to this. Now, when I'm using something like this, I was trying to see whether they're using this in the layout page. They aren't. They're using something called as the HTML helper. So this is the tag helper and this is the HTML helper. So that will help you generate the HTML. So as we go along, this is just the first session, of course, but as we go along, we'll be seeing such code that we'll be writing out there. Are we clear on how the views have been created or how the page has been rendered to you? Now, when you say return view, right, return view, it will look out for this view called index.cshtml. It will look out for this and it will just simply return that. Now, what if I don't have that index.cshtml? What will happen then? When you try to return a view, at this point, it will cause you a problem. Are we clear on this, everything?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is just like a hello world example. Let's try creating our own controller, our own view. We can create our own layout also, but let's try creating that right. The concepts that we talked about, please remember these concepts when we are using all this thing on our own. So let's start with adding a controller. Help me with this. What should I do? Tell me what should I do next? I want to add a controller. Yes. What should I do?
Right click on controller.
Right click and add a controller. So do that with me, please. I think I've asked you all to use your this thing. So far, we are not in any code. Let's try adding a controller. So when you add a controller, it gives you three choices here. First one is add an empty controller. Secondly, add a controller with some default read-write actions. And the third one here is add a controller with the entity framework. Now, we have not seen the entity framework as yet. So when we do that, we'll look at the controller out here. So let's add an empty controller and then we look at the other two options shortly. So the controller name is showing you home controller 1.cs. Is this okay? Is this name okay? Home controller 1.cs. Is this name okay or would you like to have a different name? Is this okay? First question.
Not okay.
Why not okay?
Because the first name suggests the name of the controller, and the prefix gives us it states that it's a controller.
Suffix.
So,
not
control
prefix, suffix.
control suffix.
Right.
The control one will not work there.
Correct. So this will cause you problems later. Do not give in the default name that they suggest. Instead, your name has to end with a suffix of controller. So I'm calling it default controller. Right. These little things are going to make a big difference to you when you're trying to run your code. So I'm calling it default controller and say add. What class does it inherit from out here? By default, inherits from
Controller.
the controller class. Okay, these are all exam questions. Which class does it inherit from? And if you want, they might ask you the namespace also. Microsoft.ASP.NET.Core.MVC.Controller. These are all exam type of questions, silly questions they'll ask you. Which controller does it inherit from? And so on and so forth. Now, if I want to run this controller, when I run this, it's not going to run this controller. Which one will it run first? Which one will it run first? By default, it will run what?
Home controller.
Home
Home
controller.
slash index. Why will it run home slash index? Because that
Because
is
we have
the,
set it as default.
yeah, in the pattern that we're given the default controller is home. I'm going to change that to default slash index. Now don't do this. Look at what I'm doing and tell me what is happening here. Don't do this. Wait. Right now, hold on. So I've changed the name to default. And if I run this now, will this work or not work? Will this work or not work? Yes, no. First question is, will it go to default slash index? Will it go to that?
No.
Will it go to default slash index? Answer is yes. Second question, will it show you the correct output?
No, I think we have to map that in the default controller.
Look at the output that I get. It says an unhandled exception occurred while processing the request. Invalid operation exception. What is the problem now? What is the problem now?
View index was not found.
So why have we not found it? Why is it not found it?
Because we
not?
set their default.
Because we have not created a view. This view was earlier created for you by default, no? But we have not created a view. So what do we need to also have out here? Under views,
We have to create a page default as well.
correct. Not the page default. We'll have to create a folder called default, under which, why will it be a folder called default? That's the name of your controller. Under which we'll need to have what? Index.csh table. So here it tells you what? I couldn't find it. The following locations were searched. Views slash default. What is default here? The name of that folder. Secondly, what? Index.csh table. That is the name of the file that you are looking for. Or it also looked in one more location. What are the other location? Views, in the views folder, shared slash index.csh table. So the shared is common layouts or common files that will be used by all controllers, which is why that layout was being put into the shared folder. Okay. So we have not got a file either in the slash default folder, nor do we have it in the shared folder. If I put a file called index.chtml in the shared folder, if I put this file, will my code work now? Will it work now? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Let's see this. If I go to the default controller, now if I go and run this, now it works. Where did it pick this one up from?
From the shared folder.
Shared folder.
Sorry. Yeah, have I changed it to default? Yeah, I have changed it to default. Right? So it will pick it up from the shared folder. But I don't want to do this. I don't want to create a shared this thing out here. Right? So what will I do now? I will create a folder under views called default and add a file called index.csh where I can put whatever I want to. But instead of doing it manually, this is what we're going to do. So after adding a controller, you right click on this method and you choose add view. So when you add a view, it gives you two options. Do you want to add a razor view, which is empty, or a razor view, which is not empty? So we'll start with the first option, empty razor view. And let's add it. Okay. It'll ask you for the name. What name should you give? What name should you give? What name should you give? This is the view that we're adding. What name should it have?
Index.cshtml.
So this needs to match with the name of the action method. If your action method is called index, by default, you can call it index.csh. Now, if the name does not match, you can still load it, but you have to change the code a little bit. So right now I'll keep it the same name, index.cshtml. And it adds an empty view. Why an empty view? We asked for an empty view. So here, if you want, you can add whatever Razor code that you want to. Add Razor code here. It's basically your C# code, right? Or if you want, you can add your HTML code. So this is your HTML. Are we clear on this, everybody? All right,
Yes.
let's come back to this. This is your default view. Now, will it work? Now I've got what? Index.cshtml under default. Now will it work?
Yes, sir, it will work.
Right? So this should work. And whatever I've given in that, I've just written one simple line, HTML code here. Is it using the layout page? Is it using the layout page?
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is what we've done. Now, what if the name was not index.cshtml? What if it was, I've called it purposely, I've called it index1.cshtml. Now what will happen now in this case? Again, what will the problem?
It won't be able to find the page.
It cannot find index.cshtml. So when you get an error like this, it says that it cannot find that. That means you have not given that file name in that correct location. And to solve the error, you need to know what to do. You need to give that file. Achha, now what is the other option that I have out here? Instead of saying return view of so and so, I can say return view of index1. I can say return view of index1, right? And now it is able to pick up this. So what is it now looking out for? Now it is looking out for what now? A file called index1. So when you just say return view, when you do this, what file does it look out for? What file does it look out for?
Index
A file having the
name.
same name as your method name. But otherwise, if you want to pick up a specific file, you can do this. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, sir.
So without view mentioning in the there's double inverted commas, it will look for the action that we have mentioned, right? The page
Yeah,
that we
so
have
the
mentioned in that.
default this thing is that the name of the view must match the name of the action. That is the default feature.
Okay.
But you might have a situation wherein you might, based on some condition, you might have an if else. If this condition is true, return view 1. If condition 2 is true, return view 2. Supposing you want to do that, then you'll use this sort of syntax which is there in the second.
Understood. Thanks.
Okay. So
Yes,
this is
sir.
what we had. All right. Now, when you say return view, what is this view? What is this view that you're returning? Let's look at this for a moment before we write anything else. So this view is actually of type view result. View is actually of type view result. And if you look at view result, so I've gone into view result. View result inherits from action result and implements action result. So view inherits from action result and action result also implements action result.
action result.
Okay, but this action result is an abstract class. Action result is an abstract class. Okay, the view result is one of the derived classes of the action result. View result is one of the derived classes of action result. Action result also implements action result, right? Now, just like the view result is one such derived class, there are other derived classes of action result. There are other derived classes of action result. Okay, so please make a note to yourself. make a note to yourself. Find out the different types of action results. Meaning what? Find out the derived classes of action result. Are we clear on this, everybody? Find out the derived classes of action result. And come and tell me this after the break, immediately. Right now in the break, I'm going to do this. Okay? I'll give you one such action result. I'll give you an interesting one. I can say return not found. Okay, I can say return not found. So what is this not found? This is of type not found result. If I go to not found result, this inherits from status code result. If you go into status code result, this status code result inherits from action result. Okay. And if I said return not found, for example, when I run this, what am I getting?
Page
What
not
am I
found
getting?
page not found message.
Right? Of 404. So not found, remember, was inheriting from status. Not found result was inheriting from what? Status code result. And this was another derived class of action result. Any guesses what status code result will be? Status code. What will it be? What will it be? Status code. Come on.
Class.
Yeah, but what is it? What are the status codes? What are we talking about here?
HTML errors like 404,
These are the
200
HTTP
and
status
all.
codes. Yeah, HTTP status codes. So if you wanted to return a different status code, you can return that different status. Like this, I'm asking you to, in the break, read up on and find out on what are the different action results. It won't take you more than a minute to find that out. Now, what could I write in my code out here? If some condition is reached, then return a 404, else return the view. So I could now return different things out here. Are we clear on this? So we will see more status codes and different things as we go along in the code. But at this point, just the curiosity level, what are the different action results? So why doesn't it return a view result? See, this returns a view result. Why are they returning an I action result instead of a view result? What if they did return view result? Would this code work? Sorry.
It will work with view, but not with not found.
Correct. Right? So what if I did return view result? Will this code work right now? Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this works as well. But was it Abhi who answered?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if I tried doing a return not found, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen now? The not found.
Error, sir.
It says that you are returning a view result. Not found is not related to view result. Which is why, what is the standard code that they have written everywhere?
I action result.
Returning I action result. What could they have also written instead of action result?
Action result.
Action result. Perfect. Well done. An action result was your base class, which is an abstract class. All right. Now, I didn't realize that our session is supposed to end at 1:15. In my mind, our session is ending at 1:45. But my wife just came and laid down food on the table and she gave me a dirty look saying that, what is this? How long are you taking the session? So I just realized that. So anyway, so there's enough for you to think about. We haven't written any code, have we, so far?
No, sir.
All right, but a lot of concepts that have come your brain. So in a way, it's good for you.